For Dr. Alistair Finch, the ocean wasn't a world of wonder. It was a world of data. It was sonar pings, satellite maps, and terabytes of information. With millions in funding and the best tech money could buy, he truly believed science was on the verge of mapping every last secret of the sea. His world was one of numbers, peer-reviewed papers, and the cold, hard certainty of facts you could plot on a graph. In his mind, the ocean was just a complex system, and any system could be understood, predicted, and ultimately controlled. But when he arrived in a remote Filipino fishing village, he was told about something else. The elders, men and women with hands weathered like driftwood, spoke of a phenomenon they'd known for centuries, a secret the ocean only whispers to those who truly listen. They told him the sea has a memory, that the currents have a story, that the fish listen to the moon. And sitting in the shade of a coconut tree, Dr. Finch dismissed it all as superstition. Quaint, but useless. He was about to learn a lesson that no university, no research grant, and no advanced degree could ever teach him. This is the story of how ancient Filipino wisdom humbled modern science, and the incredible ending that no one, least of all a celebrated Australian biologist, ever saw coming. Dr. Alistair Finch wasn't a man who did flights of fancy. His entire life was a monument to precision. From his office at a top Sydney Marine Research Institute, he saw ecosystems as intricate machines. To understand them, you didn't need stories. You needed sensors, genetic sequencing, and supercomputers. His approach was systematic, methodical, and deeply skeptical of anything that couldn't be measured. This worldview was on full display at the International Ocean Conservation Summit. The air buzzed with talk of carbon sequestration and submersible drone tech. Then, the Philippine delegation took the stage. A young, determined researcher named Dr. Rosa Delgado began her presentation. She didn't talk about gigabytes or sonar arrays. She talked about her mentors, elderly fishermen from a small island in the Visayas. She spoke of their ability to predict the arrival of tuna by watching how seabirds fly. She described how they knew which parts of a reef would survive bleaching just by the color of the water at sunrise. She shared their ancestral knowledge of underwater freshwater springs, invisible to satellites, but known to the community for generations. She argued that this knowledge, which she called indigenous and local knowledge, or ILK, was a scientific system in its own right, tested and refined over centuries. The room was politely quiet, but you could feel the condescension. When Rosa finished, a laugh, short and sharp, cut through the silence. It was Finch. He stood up, casually adjusting his jacket. "With all due respect, Dr. Delgado," he began, his voice dripping with paternalism. "This isn't science. This is folklore." He let the insult hang in the air. "Are you telling us that fishermen with no formal education understand coral ecosystems better than scientists with PhDs? Filipinos are island people, yes, but being surrounded by water doesn't make you an ocean expert. It makes you wet. Modern science uses satellite imaging and DNA analysis. What do your fishermen have? Wooden boats and superstitions?" Nervous laughter rippled through the room. Finch smiled. He felt he'd restored a sense of scientific order. From the Philippine table, Rosa Delgado watched him. She'd grown up in a fishing village. She'd learned to free dive before she could ride a bike. She'd spent a decade facing this exact brand of dismissiveness. Calmly, she stood. Her voice, though quiet, carried. "Dr. Finch," she said, her tone perfectly steady, "would you be interested in a demonstration? A joint research expedition, perhaps, to compare methodologies?" Finch smirked. "A demonstration? You mean watching your fishermen throw nets and pray to sea spirits?" The laughter was louder this time. He felt like a giant indulging a child. "Fine," he declared. "Let's make it interesting. We'll both study the same reef system. Your team can use its traditional methods. My team will use real science. We'll have a 30-day observation period. Let's see whose knowledge holds up." He had no idea he'd just made the biggest mistake of his career. For him, it was a public lesson in scientific superiority. For Rosa and the fishing community, it was a chance to prove what they had always known. The ocean isn't just a resource to be mapped, but a living thing to be understood. 6 weeks later, the expedition began. The spot was a remote reef in the Verde Island Passage, a strait often called the center of marine biodiversity for its staggering concentration of species. But this particular reef was a puzzle. One section on the western edge was inexplicably dying. Corals bleaching, fish vanishing. Yet, just a few hundred meters away, the eastern side was thriving with a resilience that made no scientific sense. It was as if an invisible line had been drawn on the seabed. Dr. Finch's team arrived like a military operation. 2 state-of-the-art research vessels hummed with generators. Underwater drones were launched, sonar systems deployed, and water samples collected. Their method was a textbook example of modern science, systematic, quantified, and high-tech. Finch was in his element. In the climate-controlled command center, he monitored a bank of screens. "It has to be a chemical pollutant," he announced on day 1. "A localized contamination. The answer is in the numbers. We just have to find it." Meanwhile, the Philippine team arrived. No convoy, no humming engines, just 2 narrow wooden bancas, their outriggers skimming silently over the water. Rosa stepped out, followed by 3 elderly fishermen, Tatang Ernesto, Mang Hilario, and Lolo Benji. Together, they carried over 200 years of lived ocean experience. Their gear was simple: masks and fins. Finch watched them from the deck of his vessel, then let out a short, sharp laugh. "This," he said to his junior researcher, gesturing at the wooden boats, "is exactly what I expected. Let's get to work. We have a point to prove." He turned back to his screens, dismissing them from his mind. He was here to solve a puzzle. They were just part of the scenery. For the first 3 days, the contrast was almost comical. Finch's team was a blur of activity, their divers and machines constantly moving. They filled whiteboards with complex equations, hunting for an answer. Rosa's team, to the Australians, looked like they were doing nothing at all. The 3 elders, Tatang Ernesto, Mang Hilario, and Lolo Benji, didn't dive or lower any instruments. They just sat in their banca and watched. They watched the ripples on the water. They noted where seabirds fed. They studied the subtle shifts in the water's color from dawn to dusk. They felt the wind on their skin. Nothing was written down. Everything was observed, discussed in low tones, and remembered. Finch, watching through binoculars from his air-conditioned bridge, shook his head. "What on earth are they doing?" his lead diver asked. "Meditating," Finch quipped. "Or maybe waiting for the sea spirits to grant them permission to enter. It's performance art, not science." On the 4th day, Finch's team found a clue. Water from the dying reef showed slightly elevated phosphates, a sign of pollution, but so localized it didn't make sense. "Aha!" Finch exclaimed. "It's a seep, a volcanic vent. The drones will find it." But after 2 days of scanning, the sonar maps showed nothing. The seafloor was uniform. No vent, no crack, no source. Finch's frustration began to mount. Meanwhile, on that same day, Tatang Ernesto, a man in his late 70s with eyes as deep and calm as the ocean itself, finally pointed. Not at the water, but at a distant, jungle-covered mountain. Rosa motored over to Finch's vessel. "Tatang Ernesto has a hypothesis," she said. Finch crossed his arms. "I'm all ears. He says the problem isn't in the water, it's in the land. He remembers his grandfather's stories that the mountain had a much thicker forest. Over the last few decades, it's been cleared for farms. He says now, when the rains come, the water runs off too fast, carrying soil and runoff into one specific river that empties into the bay." Finch stared. "And how would that explain this perfect line between a dead reef and a living one?" "Because of the amihan," Rosa said, using the Filipino term for the northeast monsoon. This time of year, the winds and currents push the water from that river directly onto the western part of the reef. The eastern side is sheltered by a submerged ridge, one that doesn't show up on your big maps, but is known to every fisherman here. The runoff is slowly poisoning the western reef, season after season. Finch was speechless for a second, then scoffed. "That's a charming piece of folklore, Dr. Delgado. But I have $500,000 of equipment that says you're wrong. We've measured the currents. They're not that consistent." "Is your equipment measuring 24 hours a day or just taking snapshots?" Rosa asked. "Does it factor in how fresh water and salt water mix with the tide and wind? The elders don't see the ocean in snapshots. They understand its rhythms." Finch felt a flash of anger, the arrogance. "Thank you for the input, Doctor," he said, his voice tight. "My team will stick to empirical evidence." Rosa simply nodded. But a seed of doubt had been planted. Finch ordered his team to recalibrate their buoys for 24-hour measurement. He told himself it was just to rule out her ridiculous theory. But deep down, the true scientist in him was now uncomfortably curious. The next 2 weeks were tense. Finch's team doubled down, driven by their leader's obsession. They confirmed the algae on the dying reef thrived in nutrient-rich water. Their computer models showed a pollution plume could hug the coast, but it required a perfect combination of wind and current that seemed too unlikely. Every data point was a new frustration. Meanwhile, Tatang Ernesto and his fellow fishermen had finally started diving. But they moved differently, hovering over a single coral colony for 10 minutes, just watching the tiny fish. They'd lie on the sand, tracing the paths of invisible flows. One afternoon, Mang Hilario, the quietest of the elders, surfaced with a look of discovery. He spoke excitedly to Rosa, who translated for Finch. "He says he's found a nursery," she said. "The damselfish, on this healthy side, are laying their eggs on the underside of these plate corals. But on the western reef, the same species isn't reproducing. He says the water there tastes wrong to them." Finch almost laughed. "Tastes wrong? We can't put the water tastes wrong in a peer-reviewed journal." "It's his way of describing chemical changes. Your instruments are too crude to detect as a behavioral deterrent," Rosa insisted. "Why don't you have your divers look?" Sighing, Finch radioed his team. "Humor me. Go check the plate corals on the eastern reef for damselfish eggs." 20 minutes later, the radio crackled. "He's right," his lead diver said, shocked. "The undersides are covered in them, little purple dots. Thousands. I've never seen a density like this. We didn't even think to look here." A pause. Heading to the western reef to compare. 10 minutes later, the next report came, and it was the first real crack in Finch's armor. "Nothing, Alistair. Absolutely nothing. The fish are here, but there are no eggs. It's like they've just stopped breeding." This was the turning point. It was a biological indicator his team had completely missed. An observation born not from a protocol, but from a lifetime of knowing what a healthy reef feels like. The final nail in the coffin came from Finch's own data. A week before the deadline, The 24-hour current monitors he'd set up to disprove Rosa's theory started telling a story. Plotted over 2 weeks, the data showed a clear, dominant pattern. For several hours a day, a plume of less saline water from the river was indeed being pushed directly against the western reef, just as Tatang Ernesto had said. The submerged ridge was acting as a perfect barrier, protecting the eastern side. It was all there. A story his machines had finally pieced together, weeks after an old man had simply read it in the wind and the water. The days after were quiet. The frenetic energy on Finch's ship was gone. For Alistair Finch, the silence was the loudest thing he'd ever heard. It was the sound of a lifetime of assumptions crumbling. He spent a full day in his cabin, staring at 2 reports. One was a thick binder, heavy with charts and graphs. The other was Rosa's single hand-drawn map. His report was a detailed autopsy. Hers was a biography of a living system. He had been so focused on measuring the individual trees that he'd failed to see the forest. He'd dismissed the fisherman's knowledge as folklore because it didn't speak his language. It never occurred to him that he might be the one who wasn't listening. The next morning, Finch took a small dinghy by himself and motored over to the Filipino Bangka Chief. Tatang Ernesto, Mang Hilario, and Lolo Benji were mending a net. He cut the engine and drifted. He cleared his throat. "Dr. Delgado, Tatang Ernesto," he began, his voice unsteady. He looked at the old fisherman, whose eyes held no trace of triumph, only a calm curiosity. I was wrong." The words hung in the humid air. "I came here to prove a point. And I did. Just not the one I intended." He looked down at his own hands, then back at the elders. "My team has instruments that can measure phosphates to 3 decimal places. We have drones that can map a reef to the centimeter. But we couldn't see what you saw." He turned to Tatang Ernesto. "You saw the entire system. The mountain, the rain, the wind, and the sea. All as one story. My science is just starting to develop a language for that. We call it bridging knowledge systems. You just call it knowing." Tatang Ernesto listened, then spoke softly in Visayan. Rosa smiled. "He says the ocean teaches everyone," she translated. "Most people just don't know how to listen. He says you are not wrong. You just started listening today." In that moment, the arrogance that had defined Alistair Finch was stripped away, replaced by a profound and unsettling humility. He had spent his life trying to extract the ocean's secrets. Now he understood. Knowledge like this wasn't extracted. It was earned through respect, patience, and a humility he was only just beginning to comprehend. This story shows the incredible power that lies in combining different ways of knowing. It reminds us that sometimes the most profound wisdom doesn't come from a laboratory, but from a lifetime of listening. What do you think? Should traditional and indigenous knowledge have an equal seat at the table with modern science? Share your thoughts in the comments below. The Verde Island Passage expedition, though a fictional account, illustrates a very real revolution happening in science. When Dr. Finch returned to Australia, he didn't bury the results. He championed them. At the next summit, he stood on stage beside Dr. Rosa Delgado and Tatang Ernesto and publicly recounted the entire story, calling his previous attitude the arrogance of incomplete knowledge. His fictional story mirrors a vital, real-world movement. Around the globe, from the Matauranga Maori knowledge systems in New Zealand to partnerships with traditional owners in Australia, the integration of ancient wisdom with modern science is proving to be a powerful tool for conservation. These real collaborations are leading to more effective management of protected areas and a deeper understanding of our planet. This shift doesn't see scientists studying communities, but learning from them. In the small Filipino village, Tatang Ernesto still goes out on his bangkafi. Researchers sometimes visit, but they no longer come just to deploy their instruments. They come to listen. They come to learn how to see the ocean not as a collection of data points, but as a living system with a history, a rhythm, and a voice. The Filipino fishermen didn't win a contest against science. They reminded science of something it had begun to forget, that the greatest instrument of discovery isn't a satellite or a sensor, but a human mind paying attention, humble enough to listen.